Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan and Jack Woods, who are both consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk Cyber. So today we're going to be discussing artificial intelligence or AI supplier management. So first one for you guys, what is AI supplier management?
Yeah, so essentially the easiest way to look at it is just the management of suppliers, as we always have. But in this case, it's suppliers who are in some way, shape or form providing you some kind of AI service. So that could be an AI service in the, you just use your Microsoft Copilot, your ChatGPT. That could be a service where actually they're creating you your own AI model internally, or even to the extent that actually you've already got a tool with this person, company, and they're bringing out AI as part of that tool. Or even what we've got now is actually some companies perform what's known as kind of agent automation services. So actually they come into your organization using existing AI, they create you an agent. But essentially, anyone that's bringing AI into your organization is likely to be a supplier of AI to you.
And where does it differ from normal supplier management?
Yeah, so I think one thing we kind of see is that, as I'm sure anyone that reads the news at the moment, is AI does seem to change week in, week out. I think, funnily enough, me and Jack was saying, and Jack was saying it's probably worth including here what we say is accurate this week, but maybe not next week with what changes may come out. So kind of stemming from that is the frequency of the model changes. So for example, when we talk about models, ChatGPT uses GPT 5.2, I think is the most recent. Claude has different ones, Opus, Sonnet, and anyone that's read the news at the moment may have seen there's a new one, Mythos, which again is another model. And it is, every week these are kind of being updated, new ones are coming out and the landscape is changing. Whereas I guess with traditional kind of suppliers, it's less fast. It's more kind of stable over a period of time. Whereas even when we found doing the training on AI, 2 weeks after the training session, there's actually a new feature that we will then cover on the next training session. Another thing as well, potentially, is a lot of organizations where they're using AI may not be used to a kind of token-based model. So in some cases, when an organization is using AI, you have your subscription and the amount of tokens you use impacts how much you pay. So, previously, what a lot do with their suppliers is, you pay X amount a month, a year, etc., and you're fine. Whereas with a lot of AI, what we're seeing now is you can pay that, and then when you go above your kind of limit, you actually have to start paying for the tokens used, which again, some organizations may not be aware of.
And what are some of the core risks organizations need to be sort of on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think there are a few key areas of risk when using AI. First of those, largely that we would want to focus on, is probably the data risk. If that information that you're inputting into the AI system you're using is being used as training data for that AI system, that could lead to kind of large consequences down the line if that data is then leaked as output through that tool. So there have been examples previously where questions have been asked of AI tools and they've said, oh, well, X organization manages it this way, so maybe that's the best way to do it. And that's kind of one of the key risks in terms of data leakage and unauthorized model training on your data. And then there are some of the other risks that are associated. I think George started to touch upon it, relating to the model and the updates to that model. If you don't stick to the regular updates and the patching, there may be model drift. There could be kind of hallucinations in the model where it just essentially magics up an answer to try and fit the agenda of the questions that you're asking about. I think George and I were having a conversation earlier today about the fact that there have been kind of solicitors or barristers that have had to self-report about the fact that they've used AI and it's generated a case that they've then tried to use as evidence. And it's actually a false. It's not. It doesn't exist. It's not a real case. So that does happen, and sometimes those tools can try and make you feel good about yourself. Essentially, make you think that you're correct in everything you're saying, which isn't necessarily the case. There are as well some issues around kind of bias or discrimination. So if you're using it for a specific kind of, I don't know, view of data sets, and there are kind of biases that can be looked at via those data sets, it might be the case that if that's been trained in a specific way that hasn't actually managed to get rid of those biases or discriminatory kind of views, it could give you kind of incorrect information, essentially. And then some of the other kind of stuff that we've touched upon as part of the data risk, there's compliance risks, so GDPR, and then there might be sector-specific risks that you need to be aware of as well. So if you work in kind of like healthcare, finance, defence, that kind of stuff, there may be sector-specific risks to your organisation that you need to look at and see. Generally, those will probably be around the data that's being input into the AI tool, but there might be kind of other risks, such as kind of lack of auditability of the tool, that kind of stuff.
I think as well, one that, especially to do with the supply chain management of AI that gets missed, is the kind of concept of shadow AI. So obviously we see in shadow IT, it's, you know, the IT you don't know about. What we're seeing with a lot of organizations that we speak to is it's really hard to get the oversight of actually what AI is already in your supply chain. What are you not kind of aware of that is actually being used? So we, you know, seen plenty of examples where there'll be a leadership meeting and someone at the end has asked a question. Someone's gone, oh yeah, you know, don't worry, I've got that recorded. And then, you know, for that company, it was a case of, okay, how is this recorded? Oh, we use AI. Oh, what did you use? And then, you know, it turns out actually, you know, if you're getting a service from an AI provider you didn't know you had before that conversation. Without knowing that, it's really hard to actually have the oversight of how do we secure it? How do we control it? And again, back to, like Jack says, with the legal, it's the IP ownership as well. You know, when we are using our AI kind of providers, who actually keeps the output? You know, do we know for sure using this provider, the output is ours and no one else's? Is there guardrails in place for this supplier that are going to protect us from IP? So Microsoft, for example, have a customer copyright commitment. So they've got incentives their side to prevent, you know, essentially you getting into a Colin the Caterpillar, Cuthbert the Caterpillar situation where you've accidentally got something which is very identical to someone else's kind of products as such. But yeah, lots of risks that can be there if it's not properly kind of supervised and measured in a structured manner.
Yeah, I think the shadow AI point is quite good as well in terms of employee knowledge, because if there are no kind of controls or rules in place around the level of information that can be kind of input into the AI tool, then that the data being sent to AI systems may be much more sensitive than an organization might expect. If they kind of have treated employees and said, oh yeah, we kind of trust that you're going to use common sense and not put confidential information into the AI tool, and then it turns out kind of a couple of months down the line there's a breach and it's because someone's done that, that's a bit of an issue. Whereas if they implement those rules and controls quite early to try and mitigate that risk, that helps to stop the likelihood of a breach.
Yeah, and I think that can be a worrying one, kind of, because a lot of times you look at AI, and it might be, you know, how can we automate this? Oh, it needs to see this or connect it, and you can see people get caught up in the whole almost excitement of what it can do that you forget that you probably want to check what it can do and what it has access to allow that.
Yes, it's the whole kind of Jurassic Park concept, isn't it? It's we got so caught up by the case of what we could do that we didn't stop to ask ourselves the question of should we do it. So it's that concept, isn't it?
And how can organisations perform due diligence?
Yes, I think one thing to probably note is that your standard questionnaire, for example, you may have for your suppliers, might not be the most relevant and accurate when it comes to looking in towards AI, simply because there'll be a few questions that are AI related that otherwise you just would not consider at all. So example of that could be actually, when we're looking at a supplier, is there any human oversight of what they do? Were the AI to go wrong, is it purely all automated, or is someone looking over that? Again, even when it comes to customer support, as an organization, are you happy with a completely automated customer support, or are you an organization that would prefer actually, we want to have someone that we can speak to, ask those kind of questions, get an answer, rather than, one that's potentially just from AI. I think, again, one thing we are seeing, the boom of AI is there are a lot of new companies that are kind of cropping up that have no real background as such. So essentially, we could be looking at a supplier that's 1 year established. We don't necessarily know their track record for security. That's not to say, don't use them at all, but that is something you have to consider, is that you've got no historical kind of security with them there. Equally, supply chain management, but with AI, we're getting a lot of kind of fourth and further kind of supply chain. So example of that is you may have an AI company that you're looking at using that automate a certain thing for you or can do a certain thing. Actually, that AI company uses, for example, the model that GPT uses, so ChatGPT, they're using that same underlying model. Well, actually, do you need to consider, we've got the supplier here to be aware of, but we need to understand how they're using that underlying model from OpenAI, etc. How could that potentially impact us? Because we're adding more to our supply chain, it's getting larger. Again, it's not a snapshot. So as we discussed earlier, the models change quite frequently because obviously everyone's trying to keep up, get ahead of each other, etc. When we're doing our supply chain and we are checking it's not a snapshot in time as such. We need to constantly be on the lookout, kind of what's coming, what's updated. Again, when we're asking provider questions, we want to know, does your model update over time? Is there a chance here that 1 year later your model's not updated? The information it's working on is kind of 1 year out of sync. It's drifted from what is currently accurate and up to date as such. Again, some of the basics are, is our data used to train? Is there a way that we can actually opt out of this training? Are you providing the options? What options are there in your tool to limit actually what users can see, what users can access? How many guardrails do you have that you are letting us put up? So, it might be that actually what it does is it can take your Microsoft permissions and it's just an extension of that. But you might say, okay, but we want a bit more of that because, for example, we have a finance team. We want them to use the AI. We want it to have their permissions, but we don't want it to see X, Y, Z. Is there a way we can prevent the AI completely from seeing that, keeping the rest of the permissions, for example? Again, we want to look at high risk incident happens. Okay, well, are we getting any support from the provider, or are we just kind of left in the dark with this black box situation and it's all gone messy? How do we cover ourselves? Again, when we're looking at the copyright, for example, Microsoft's a good example because they've got their customer copyright commitment. What's in place to help prevent that from happening to us, us falling victim to that without actually knowing it? If we don't know that the model is potentially taking copyright information and amending that for us, then that's putting us in risk and in danger about us actually being aware of it as such. Again, I think what we need to consider is that it's not all going to be questionnaires. Look at the big providers. Have they got a trust center? Are they having third parties verify them independently? Again, it's getting to the standard good practices we see with supply chain management of, checking, are they doing what they're saying they're doing? Is someone else checking their homework? It's not just them saying we do this. It's someone's come in and actually verified that.
If you're a larger organization and you've got the opportunity to negotiate contracts with these AI providers, you could include specific clauses relating to the use of AI in those supplier contracts. So what we've talked about in terms of use of customer data for model training, you would include that actually, we don't want you to do that. So suppliers should not use or shall not use customer data for model training. You may request that all audit logs for model inference requests should be available at request. And you might also include the want for notification of model changes, because again, it's something that we talked about. It's not a snapshot. It's something that is updating quite consistently. So you might, although it'll probably be a notification every week, and your IT team might then start to ignore it, at least then you're getting notified that the model is changing and that there are potentially new risks that are being kind of identified as part of that. And the other part of it would be also as well, if they've got any history of penetration testing for their tool, because it identifies the security kind of controls that they've got in place. George talked about it earlier about the fact that a lot of these organizations are just popping up at the moment. There's a bit of a boom because there's AI, and so that if there's a lack of history behind that organization, you can't look at them and say, oh, well, yeah, brilliant, they've not had an incident in the last year, when actually they've only been in existence for 6 months. So if they are doing the right things in terms of achieving security certifications, getting penetration tests regularly, that kind of stuff, it helps you build out that due diligence, and it helps you make an informed decision on whether or not you want to use them.
I guess another one off the back of that as well, isn't it? It's similar to ISO, where you have the exit from cloud services. Mm-hmm. How do you actually exit from the your AI provider if you stop using them? Is there a way that you can, with some AI providers, for example, you can actually export your data to then import into a newer provider so it keeps what you've already established? Or, can you actually secure that deletion with them? Yes, they may choose not to use you for training, but, is our data still kind of kept anywhere once we've actually exited the contract with them? How do we know it's actually being deleted once we've exited and it's not just kind of staying there until they don't need that space anymore?
So when does AI supply management stop? I'm guessing it's not just after onboarding.
No. So, unfortunately, there's constant work that he's doing. Again, like Jack mentions, when you're keeping updated with the model, etc., well, you can't just do that, in January and then not check it until kind of December. It's more of an ongoing process, especially with the speed that AI is kind of moving. Unfortunately for your supply chain management, it is a case of it's consistently managing them. It's not a snapshot in time. It's consistently keeping on top of things.
And so, I think the key there is probably good communication between potentially the IT lead that's managing those kind of model updates and looking to make sure that there's nothing that's going to increase their threat landscape, and communication with them and potentially the supplier owner within the organization, or someone within a procurement team or that manages the suppliers. Good communication between those two is quite imperative, so that we can say, actually, hold on, they've done this model change, it's increased our risk. Do we need to have a conversation with the supplier? Shall we have a conversation internally? Are there any additional controls that we can add? That kind of stuff. That's probably the key thing to take away there in terms of supply management. It doesn't always have to be conversation with the supplier. It can be internal conversations to discuss potential new risk. And then dependent on the outcome of that, then it could lead to a conversation with that supplier. But yeah, staying in the loop is quite key.
I guess off the back of that, was a really good example actually recently where one of the AI providers now allows you to connect your Microsoft 365 account to it. Obviously, if you've not got organizational oversight of that, people could accidentally be creating more issues than you may think. Again, it's getting back to the whole shadow AI. And if you don't know that feature's there, you don't know to say to people, actually, yes, we've approved this at leadership board level, or actually, no, this is, denied. This is not allowed for now until we look into it a bit further.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. If any of our listeners want to ask Jack and George a question that they'll answer in a future episode, you can follow the link in the description, which will take you to a form on our website, or you can just pop your question in the comments. So thank you again for your time, guys, and thanks everyone for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.